Nonverbal communication are all the elements of communication other than words. Now, scholars state that the majority, between 65 and 93, that kind of depends, or percent that is, it depends on the scholar, as being a way of measuring from nonverbal behavior of our total communication package. So, like language, nonverbal communication is also related to culture and gender. So first, nonverbal communication conveys cultural meanings of gender. Second, men and women use nonverbal communication to express themselves as gendered. And we're going to look at that. So this week, we're going to consider what function nonverbal behavior or nonverbal communication plays in conveying messages or communicating to one another. Let's get started. We'll begin with function of nonverbal communication. One, to supplement verbal communication. So what we often will do is we'll use the nonverbal to supplement the verbal. So for example, repeating words. So instead of saying yes, 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 I might go yes. So I'm using my words and my nonverbal to use as a repeat. In parenting, instead of saying, please pick that up, you notice I put my finger out, so I'm also pointing. The nonverbal of the pointing supports the repeated words of pick that up or do this. So one of the purposes is that of repeating words. It can also involve contradicting a verbal message. We can use it that way, where sometimes we might go, sorry. So it's contradictory. I'm nodding, I'm smiling, and I'm saying sorry. Well, if I'm saying sorry, I have a sad face? So we sometimes either use it as a repeating, or we'll use it as a contradicting symbol. It does help explain where sometimes our communication can be misunderstood. We're not always congruent with our words and our nonverbal. Now we can also use nonverbal as a complementing verbal statements. So if we clap our hands and smile while we're declaring excitement, so it complements the nonverbal of clapping hands and the smile and maybe my jumping up and down all complement my excitement. And so the words can all be things that I'm saying I'm excited, but the nonverbal supports it, it complements it. We also may use it as a replacing language. For example, rolling eyes to indicate disgust. I don't have to say I'm not interested or I'm disgusted. I can roll my eyes. And so it replaces using words. We are also capable of using accenting our verbal language by emphasizing certain words. So with the way that I say I'm happy, my nonverbal will emphasize that point. Secondly, we can use nonverbal to regulate interactions. And we do this through eye contact, body posture, and vocal inflection cues. These vocal inflections, they can cue others into when we want to speak and when we want them to speak. So through eye contact, our body posture, we all can communicate quite significantly, but we can use it in a way of indicating when we want you to speak. So sometimes when we use as a question, the inflection goes up. So what's your name? The inflection went up. If I want to make a statement, the inflection goes down. Please get that done now. So our inflection cues can let people know about our interaction with them without using words specifically. Women tend to use cues to invite and encourage others into conversations, whereas men, they tend to use more cues to maintain the attention and discourage others from speaking. 3, it's to establish the relationship level of meaning. Now, nonverbal helps us do that in 3 primary dimensions of relationships. 1 is on responsiveness, 2 is on liking, and 3 is on power. So let's look at them individually. With responsiveness, that's interest in the interaction and involvement with others. Now this can be and include nonverbal cues, including responsiveness like inflection, eye contact, and body posture. So women tend to be more responsive than men. They tend to communicate with others more and respond to others' emotions more. Responsiveness differs between cultures. So how we are responsive to one another can be enhanced through our nonverbal. Like I said, eye contact, body position. You're more responsive when you're leaning in, your hands are in front, and you're making good eye contact. That's demonstrating responsiveness. Now the second part, when we mention responsiveness, liking, and power, we'll touch base on liking. Liking, how much we seem to care for and like being around somebody. And we'll use our nonverbal to help that. And it's often conveyed in nonverbal cues such as the eye contact again, and how close we are. Now personal space examples, if you want to use that as part of this, how close we are with somebody physically will show liking. It's why with strangers we're typically not right up in front of them. In our comfort zone, where someone who we really care about, we will let them be there. Now girls and women tend to be socialized more strongly than boys and men to communicate liking, because they are socialized to be more nice with others and build relationships. Now dislike is communicated non-verbally as well. Now I want to also emphasize that just because in the text and what I communicate that there's this division between men and women, it doesn't mean that there's nothing in between. Of course there is. There are men who do communicate liking in a way that's very similar to how women may, and women who may communicate the way that they like very similar to men. It's not as black and white as it comes across, but we are trying to, I think, communicate that through socialization, men and women are not socialized in exactly the same way. There are differences, and we're just trying to highlight that in the textbook, and that's what I'm trying to communicate here. So we look at power, or power and control, and to what extent to which people use or are seen to be equal or dominant or differential to one another. So there's three primary ways we communicate power: through our voice, like I mentioned, the voice going down, the loudness of the voice, the intensity or the timbre of the voice. Touch, if I had somebody else here and I put my arm around them and touch the other shoulder, that's a very different sort of touch than touching on the near shoulder. And if a man does this to a woman, that feels very different, especially if you don't know them very well, than this does. So touch can have a huge impact on power. I could demonstrate power this way more than I could this way. And we use the use of space. I'm a tall guy, and if I wanted to express power non-verbally, I could walk up to someone who's shorter and be close to them and overemphasize my height. That might, in the use of space, influence how they feel about me and how I want them to feel about me. So men tend to talk louder and with more inflections than women. They tend to take up more space and touch people more to communicate their status. Women are more likely to give up their space than men. So we're looking at a wide range of ways that nonverbal can be used in functioning, how we use it. Now let's look at the forms. Now this would be the different types of nonverbal communication. I've already touched on some, but let's go back and look at them categorically. The first we'll touch base on was what are known as artifacts. Now artifacts are personal objects that express our identity and how we view ourselves. Now these can include colors, types of toys, demonstrate appropriate behaviors, and activities for boys and girls. For example, building sets for boys, dolls for girls. These are the things, artifacts, stuff that we could use to demonstrate our gender. Like I said, the clothes that we wear often differentiate men and women. So clothing and other types of artifacts, while less strict than in past generations, that just means that there was a time when what men wore and behaved like was very different than women. Now we're seeing a little more crossing over. So men's clothing tends to be a little less colorful, allows for more easy movement. Women's clothes call attention to their bodies and form-fitting styles and clingy materials. You can all probably remember the different styles that men and women would have wear. If you watch athletic events, beach volleyball, for example, at the Olympics, what do the women wear compared to what do the men wear? Is that an accident? Maybe. If women are wearing very little because it's free, allowing them to do their volleyball game much more responsibly and better and more athletically, then why aren't men wearing Speedos? It's interesting that in our cultures, we do see that the expectations of how men and women dress is different. Advertising. Oh, and you could spend a whole course looking at the role of advertising and gender. Advertising emphasizes what artifacts men and women are supposed to use. Some people use artifacts to challenge cultural prescriptions of masculinity and femininity. Now, number 2 type are what's known as proxemics and personal space, and this refers to how people use the distance in space. Proxemics refers to how people use space, including the distance they keep from one another. Norms about proximity are culturally construed. That's usually because it's usually one of those things that power are given, people with power are given more space. Now, the proxemics would be what's your personal bubble? You know, how much space do you like to keep between you and other people that you don't know very well, compared to the space you want to leave for people who you care about a lot. And again, for those who you don't know at all and maybe don't even like very well, you might have a bigger space. So that has a lot to do with how we communicate. That if somebody wants to impress upon you something important and maybe some power over you, they will breach some of your personal space. Now there's a subterm in this that's called territoriality. And this is personal space that we protect from the invasion of others. People with more power have more control over how they use their space. And women are more likely than men to give up their personal space. Now, one of the ways to look at this territoriality along with artifacts would be, how do you decorate your house, your apartment, your office? Now, what we would find is that people who are in powerful positions often have more space, and they decorate it differently and put up the personal things that represent their power, pictures of people they've had their picture taken with that are in powerful positions, up on their wall, their accomplishments and things, and they have the space to do that, whereas everybody else who's not a boss is in a cubicle and can pinpoint things on a spongy, wall that separates them from the other person in the cubicle. And so territoriality is, how do we do that? You walk into my house and I'll have up my personal effects to define my space, but I go into your house and you would have entirely different things. Each of them represents our territory, and it's done non-verbally. Third is haptics. Now, this is the use of touch. Females are more likely to initiate touches to express support, affection, comfort, while men associate touch with control and power. Men are also more likely than women to use touch forcefully, and many men are unaware of how strong they are. Now, this topic is very interesting. Men typically don't hug each other. They might do, a fist punch, they might do a chest pump, but you look at other cultures where it's appropriate, and an appropriate way to communicate for men to show affection and friendship is to kiss on the cheek and to hug. It's not something that's very common. It might be changing in North America, but it's not very common in North America for men to show affection to one another in terms of friendship. It gets misunderstood to be something more intimate than maybe it in fact is. And it's partly a cultural belief or expectation about what men and women do in terms of expressing using touch as an example. Fourthly, kinesics. This is the facial and body motions that we use. In Western Caucasian women tend to smile more than Western Caucasian men. Now I say Caucasian because it varies from culture to culture and from ethnicity to ethnicity as to what kind of contact, whether it be smile or eye contact, or expression of emotions that we're supposed to share. For many women, smiling is a basic interactional behavior, whereas for many men, it's a signal of emotion. And men are typically not socialized to show as much emotion as women are. Men are more likely than women to use aggressive kinesics. Women tend to make more eye contact during conversations than men do, and men tend to perceive sustained contact, eye contact, as aggressive or challenging. In the gang world, looking too long at somebody is a sign of disrespect. Don't you know who I am? And that might be reason to have a fight. Now, paralanguage, this is the fifth one. This refers to voice, voice pitch, volume, inflection, and pauses. Male and female physiology doesn't fully explain the differences in pitch. Men tend to use a lower pitch, where women tend to use a higher pitch, and less inflection to gain and hold attention. Our tone of voice, the cadence in which we speak, how fast, the rate, all can be nonverbal communication. Even though it sounds like it's verbal, verbal are the words. Nonverbal are the way that we use words with our voice inflections and how loud we speak, and those things are nonverbal. Okay? Women tend to use softer pitch, lower volume, and more inflection to appear polite and caring. These are socialized behaviors and not entirely result of physiological difference. There isn't a physical element in the larynx that causes that for women or doesn't allow that in men, is the point. Okay, number 6. 6 is the physical appearance, refers to how a person looks. Now, both sexes may feel pressure to conform to culturally defined ideals and appearance. And what I've done is I've put up some pictures of magazines from 2017, Health Magazine and Entrepreneur, to get an idea that when we present who people are supposed to look like, the image, they're not always looking like us. And the point about nonverbal is partly they're trying to sell magazines, and they're not going to sell magazines by putting just anybody up. They want to put up the people that they think best represents their philosophy, their ideals, and the things that they think are important to sell to people. And that influences a lot of people's decisions about what they need to look like and the pressures that we may feel to accommodate that. Some polls indicate that men are generally satisfied with their appearance and are less likely to connect appearance to their overall competence and value. However, as our culture increasingly emphasizes men's bodies, more men are attempting to gain idealized muscular masculinity through working out, weightlifting, even steroid use. Gay men are more likely to attach physical appearance to self-worth. Girls and women are more likely to feel negatively about their appearance, and this dissatisfaction, particularly for Caucasian women, influences overall self-esteem. And these are all nonverbal elements, and we see this constantly. We're barraged with appearance issues. Western culture emphasizes an extreme thinness. It also is dangerous in terms of its dangerousness to physical health, and it may be a factor in girls and women increasing concerns with weight and eating disorders. Now, we certainly are seeing more social media reflect acceptance of all variations of women and men, and that certainly is encouraging, but the pressures are still there to be of a certain variety, a certain way. In general, Western Caucasian women are more likely to strive towards unrealistic body ideals, whereas African American women, particularly those who strongly identify with their ethnic heritage, tend to be more satisfied with their bodies and less prone to eating disorders. Slide 4. Now let's look at the differences that exist between women and men and their skill for interpreting nonverbal behavior. Generally, Females are better able to decode nonverbal behavior and more accurately perceive others' emotions. However, men are noticeably faster at recognizing angry facial cues. Now, various theories are offered to explain this strong ability to read feelings. If we look at the biological theories, they posit that it's a result of a sex-related brain difference. Cognitive development and social learning theories, they state that females are encouraged to be sensitive to others and to the relationships from a very young age, so their socialization. Standpoint theory, well, it suggests women's ability to decode results from their standing as subordinate members in society, that influences their ability to do so, given where they are on the scale and standpoint. Okay, let's also now look at the cultural values associated with nonverbal communication, and there's a lot. Women's nonverbal behavior tends to emphasize community, and men's emphasize agency, the doing. Research suggests that women are expected to act more dependent and men more independently. Western society has a bias towards favoring more masculine qualities. Now, when we talk in terms of this variation, you remember when I posted the video of nonverbal behavior, and in particular, maybe I didn't do it in this class. Back it up. Masculine qualities will end there, and then we'll just carry on. And we can also say that cultural beliefs are changeable. Nothing that we used to do, or very little of what we used to do, still holds true today, that these things are changing, and they're going to continue to change, and they're going to change rapidly with the use of social media and media generally, and the way we interact with people on a day-to-day basis. They may be altered as we recognize differences in the non-judgmental manner and resist restrictive nonverbal gender prescriptions. We may just start to become better at discerning what's positive and what's negative, and start to push and behave in that way. Thirdly, respecting gender styles of nonverbal communication. Now, I'd like to sort of say in conclusion, what makes the value to making an effort to understand, respect, and to appreciate others' nonverbal communication on their own terms. By recognizing and attempting to understand others' pattern of nonverbal behavior may also increase our appreciation for individual differences and less rigidity restricting our expectations for nonverbal behavior. It may also provide a greater range of communication options for us. I hope you found this useful and interesting, the combination of verbal and nonverbal communication and how we use it to express gender in our culture. All right, everybody, keep up the good work.